Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn@pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hello there, and welcome to Thursday, October 26th. That happens to be what it is at the moment. I don't know when you'll be listening to this, but welcome, whenever. I'm pawing through some of what I pulled out of the newspapers today, and it seems sort of paltry. I don't know. You know, there are days, and I've told you this, that I can't. But I'd like to get on to something a little different today as the result of some new accusations regarding sexual harassment, and these against former President George H.W. Bush, who has apologized through a spokesman. They're not denying any of the allegations. And I wonder if we're capable of having a sober, serious conversation about this obviously pervasive problem. And I don't have a lot of faith that we are capable, simply because it just hasn't seemed that we've been able to do that much these days. To listen to one another, to not go directly from neutral into some screaming. I don't know. I just don't know. We've got, we are not of one mind about what constitutes sexual harassment, although we are more aware of it than we've been in my lifetime. And there are some who think that the reaction, the revulsion about Harvey Weinstein, Jesus Christ, has opened the floodgates. But see, floodgates are opened all the time, and we don't end up having a satisfying conversation. Floodgates were opened in the last years about innocent black, unarmed men being regularly gunned down by police. That became something where the floodgates opened, and all of a sudden every day in the news we were privy to video or a recounting of such an occurrence. And what did it do for us? What did we do? I guess we've reached a point where nobody can say you didn't know. How could you not know? But I find fewer apologists for men groping women than apologists for police shooting unarmed black men. Although there are those. I don't know. I'm sorry. Can you tell I'm just sort of, I'm weary. And in that regard, I'm no different, I'm sure, than you. There are days when you just can't do it anymore. So two women have come out and had almost verbatim stories of taking a group photo with the former president, who's now in a wheelchair, suffers from Parkinson's syndrome, clearly not in good shape. And they both recounted how he put his while they stood next to him for the photo, he put his hand on their behinds, and in one case, I guess gave a squeeze. That woman said that she had been assaulted by the president. If sexual assault is going to be everything on the spectrum from out and out rape to a 93-year-old man in a wheelchair sticking his hand on your butt, then we've got quite a spectrum there, I think. And if you get to the point, and I'm not, again, you don't get a pass because you're 90, because you're 93 and in a wheelchair. But we've got to learn to do some sifting, winnowing, I think. Keep your eye on the, I don't know. I might be wrong about this. I mean, I might be generationally incapable of reacting as strongly as so many young women do. I mean, I lived my life in that regard, if in their definition, being sexually assaulted. I mean, constant. But look what happens when, I'm being incoherent, I think, but look what happens when we fail to acknowledge that there is this spectrum of behavior that now we're somehow lumping all together, putting in the same barrel. And you know where you end up? You end up in a bad place, which is where I think we are in regard to touching children. When I volunteered in my son's grade school, I remember I put my hand on a little boy's shoulder, and I was told by a librarian, you can't touch them. You can't touch him. I mean, we've gotten crazy. Teachers used to be able to hug a kid. Good job, give them a hug. They can't do that anymore. They'd be charged with, well, pedophilia, sexual harassment. I mean, we're going to get ourselves into a point where, I mean, we're getting ourselves there, into a point where we're fearful of talking because we might say the wrong word, fearful of interacting in any physical manner because it would be regarded as sexual harassment. As I said, I'm a sexual harasser and a harassee. I touch people when I talk to them. I touch strangers sometimes if I'm talking to them. I'll grab their hand or grab an arm. That's now considered, I mean, I didn't get permission. Somehow, I think we're at a place where something good can come. Because you've got guys, and forgive me for never getting quite as worked up about the Weinstein stuff. But it's because it's, to me, not surprising at all. At all. As I said, I have been assaulted in that manner, harassed in that manner, many times in my professional life. I guess a lot of people, Charles Blow, for instance, who's an opinion writer for the New York Times, tweeted I saw it right before I started the show, where he was just blown away by the fact that I guess some Mark Halperin, who you see on on the cable shows pontificating about this and that. He's a political reporter. How he now has acknowledged, because 5 women came out saying that he had groped them and pushed his body up against theirs when he clearly had an erection. And Blow says, what is going on? You mean this happens? You mean men do this? I mean, in this regard, probably men he knows thought were fine fellows. And if this is a moment when all the clueless men and women, I suppose, who haven't been out in the workaday world as much, come to understand how so many men comport themselves with women, this is a good thing. If you are appalled, that's a good thing. But forgive me for not being as blown away by it. Every woman that I know can come out with stories. Every woman I know. And if I look back at my past, I mean, my heavens, something like what now Bush 41 is being said to have done, and he hasn't denied it. I mean, that's just normal behavior for an awful lot of guys, totally normal. And most women just take it. It's not just the high and mighty. It's not Mark Weinstein only, and Roger Ailes, and Bill O'Reilly. It's little Tom, Dick, and Harrys who own, their own little shop. It is middle managers. It is everywhere, guys. Women have been taking this crap forever. I mean, everybody acting like this is some shocking story is laughable to me. However, as I said, maybe this is good. Maybe it's good. Guys are dropping like flies. I bet there's a lot of nervous people around, especially if they're known, because you can out guys who are known, celebrities, and get at them. But if it's the middle manager that you have to report to, how do you out him? Because you're still, as a woman, stuck in that little pond at which, if you were to report him, you would report him to what? His boss or the head of HR in your company, if there is such a thing. And by doing so, you risk a lot. You can't call the newspaper and say, I have to tell you what Joe Schmo here has been doing to me for years. No, it doesn't work that way when you're just a regular woman and the guy is just a regular guy. So while we are astonished by these high and mighty, powerful men behaving badly, let us not forget that this happens constantly. From the minor to, So if a guy puts his hand on my shoulder, I do not consider that sexual assault, for sure. I also do not consider it sexual harassment. If he puts his hand on my boob, that's sexual harassment. I still don't think that rises to assault. But I'm an old-fashioned girl. I don't know. So her account, the latest account about poor George H.W. See, I feel sorry for him. He's nearing his end. He's generally considered a relatively good human being. He's done his thing. He served his country in many capacities, blah, blah, blah. And now he gets taken down for this. Here's what he did. The woman says, we all circled around him and Barbara, so his wife was there, for a photo, and I was right next to him. He reached his right hand around to my behind, and as we smiled for the photo, he asked the group, do you want to know who my favorite magician is? And as I felt his hand dig into my flesh, he said, David Copperfield. Oh, Jesus. Now, I'm sorry. He thought it was a joke. He thought the young woman wouldn't mind being party to the joke. That is going too far, but the woman says everyone in the room laughed politely or out of discomfort, and Barbara Bush, the wife, said something like, he's going to get himself put in jail, to which everybody laughed even harder. That's not a sexual assault. That is not proper behavior. It's not proper behavior. You don't squeeze somebody's behind if you don't know him. Putting your hand on it when he's in a wheelchair and she's right there, I can see where his arm might have been there, actually. But, I mean, God dang it. We have a call. Let's see if somebody else can talk about this. Caller, hello.
Hey.
Hi.
Hey, Lynn.
Hi.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just a couple years younger than you.
Yeah.
You know what Bush did? Was it assault? Okay.
I don't
You're
think.
not saying it's not assault, but how about if it was a 13-year-old girl and he did the exact same thing? Then we would consider it assault. It's almost like we give it a pass past a certain age. And that's where you have to think about it, because if they did the exact same thing.
You know, it's funny because, you know what? I even have to say to you, if a 93-year-old man squeezed a 13-year-old girl's behind, I also would not consider that assault. Here's why. That's
But how about if he was 60?
because he's not doing it in a sexual way. That's my guess. Really not.
Hey, I'm saying at 60 he was doing it in a sexual way.
He's doing it because he thinks he can get away with it. Exactly. If you think you can get away with it. My God, when you said that, I had this, you sent me reeling back to a living room in Green Bay, Wisconsin, on Iroquois Street, where a party was going on, a grown-up party, and I was a friend of the daughter who's lived there, and a man grabbed me, Mr. Shaw, he grabbed me, and man, he squeezed my behind so much that it hurt. I remember screaming. No adult there said a word. I wouldn't have expected them to, but I ran. And my friend said to me, did he get you? I said, yes. And she said, he always does. You got to try to stay away from him.
We all knew people like that.
Right?
You know, you're right. Yes. Yes. It took me back to many experiences.
And I didn't even understand what it was. I'm a little girl. I didn't know it was sexual. Was it sexual? I don't know. Or did he just really like little girls? I was naive. I was accepting that children took this crap. Women took this crap. Yeah.
I knew it was wrong. And you know what? I'm thinking, I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. I was 14 and inappropriately touched by a nun. Okay? I knew. You just intuitively knew what was right and what was wrong. Something was really creepy. So I had it done by men and women.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, adults are, and I understood maybe because of I had it done by a female also, that I understood. I mean, it was anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah, and you just sort
had to
of
go by instinct.
Yeah, and I was totally, I don't know, when you said men and women, then something else banged into my head. Now I'm on a bed in a dorm at Northwestern University, sitting on a twin bed with Martha Loss, who was next to me, and two other girls across on another bed. And we were all talking and laughing. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, Martha leaned over and bit my breast. And I was so startled. And so were the others. I mean, everybody just sort of like, what? And I looked at her and I said, what are you doing? It didn't occur to me there was anything sexual going on. I'm 18 at this point. It didn't occur to me. I just knew it was odd, but nothing was said and we all moved on. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't really,
but
I
it's
just
really
don't
hard to give
know.
a pass to. Start getting a pass to somebody because they're 90-some. Well, I've seen that, people in their 80s.
Yeah.
And you just intuitively know that they've gotten away with this
forever.
their whole lives,
right?
Now
forever.
we're giving them a pass.
Right.
But
right. So
okay.
I just don't know what to say. I'm just, if we get a little more aware, and if more people who weren't aware are now more aware, maybe some men will reel it back a little bit, but I don't have a lot.
Yes, and I think that's necessary because I'm thinking of all the men I do know in my life who aren't like that, who I know would never do such a thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
My own family member. I mean,
yeah, I know.
Not all men do that.
No, I know they don't. But a whole hell of a lot of them do. So I got a feeling it's sort of like men have to get on men. I don't know. I don't know. I appreciate your call. I think she dropped off or hung up or something. As I said, I'm incoherent because my whole life experience is such that some of what's called assault now I just thought of as normal behavior. Here's, by the way, what the Bush spokesman said. They first of all acknowledged that the president has groped women in the past. I mean, there's probably millions. I mean, he was the president, so he took a lot of those kinds of photos, and he probably never missed an opportunity. Whatever. The president has groped women in the past, and the spokesman said he thought it was an attempt to put people at ease. And then he goes on to say, at age 93, President Bush has been confined to a wheelchair for roughly 5 years. So his arm falls on the lower waist of people with whom he's taking a picture. Well, I said that, yeah. I can see where if he has his arm around. Now, see, when you take pictures with strangers, don't you sometimes often you put your arm around them, this and that? Is that, and if you put your arm around them and your hand sort of resting near their butt, is that now something you can't do? Anyway, the spokesman says, to try to put people at ease, the president routinely tells the same joke. He does that David Copperfield joke over and over and over again. Barbara's heard it 500,000 times. And on occasion, the spokesman says, he has patted women's rears in what he intended to be a good-natured manner. Some have seen it as innocent. Others clearly view it as inappropriate. To anyone he has offended, President Bush apologizes most sincerely. I would say in that regard, end of story. However, if it makes us talk about definitions and appropriate behavior, then fine and dandy. We have a call. Hello, caller.
Yes, good morning, Lynn.
Hi.
Hey, Lynn, I think the problem is, I'm a 56-year-old man working in a restaurant. Our language is so coarse.
Mm.
And I see it happen with young people. Everybody talks to each other rudely and with discourtesy. And what happens is people get offended. So we're not only, assaulted physically, which President Bush, I think, is just an old man. I think he was joking around. I know I'm not a woman. I don't want to be people groping me. But I think his wife was there. He was not doing it.
No, I agree. Right.
He was trying to be funny, and it was a bad.
She must have seen him do this. She must have heard that joke 500,000 times, known that what he was up to. She didn't take whatever. But
come on, he's not getting. Now, if he's doing this,
no, he's been doing it
when the wife's not there, and his secretary comes by him to tell him something, and he grabs her when nobody's looking. Now that's a totally different story, because you're trying to hide something, obfuscate the truth. He's not. It was inappropriate, yes. But like I said, too many of us, the language we use toward each other, especially to women, and even the women use. I've heard women last week tell me words that I said, "How are you feeling today?" And she used a word that was totally inappropriate, totally degrading of women and people in general. I don't understand.
Well, yeah, you do. You do understand that our culture has become extremely coarse. Our political discourse has become coarse. The way we deal with each other has become coarse. A lot of it has to do with the casualness of being able to say nasty things to people anonymously on the internet. It's loosened a lot of our whatever things we had that sort of kept our tongues in check. That's gone. It's just gone.
Well, but we don't filter our thoughts.
No.
And we're going to have distortion. It's like a music. You have to purify the music to hear it properly. You just can't just sum out any kind of notes you want and say, well, that's good music. Well, no, it's not. It's just disharmony. It's discourteous. It's not uplifting. It's just, and I don't know the solutions, but we all have to, the only solution is we ourselves have to just try to not do it.
That's right.
We have to be not guilty of it, try to not do it. Even though we're all guilty, because if we get into the swirl, when everybody starts swirling, we start swirling too. And then the television and everything comes at us, it tries to make it like that. And it has to be like that. It's like you can't have gray. Everybody got to be black and white. And the more black and white, the more blacker and the more whiter, then the better. Then it seems like the culture is just like, that's what they're excelling at.
Yeah.
But it's never, we're all gray. Come on, stop.
That's right.
Everybody tries to think they're totally one thing.
That's right. Yeah, we're complicated. It's complex, and we sort of create. The only way we seem to be able to talk to each other is by making things either this or that, and no territory in between.
We can all try to uplift each other. It's like after you're after the year, try to be. If we can uplift people's spirits, because I know you can do it, Lynn, I can do it. We can all just try to each, because there's a lot of people with a lot of problems in this world. And like you always say, we're so blessed. We were given so much. We had stable family life. We lived like kings and queens. You told me how your family was, and basically you're so blessed, and you're like rich beyond all means. Not financially, I don't care about that, but the family and support you have all your life. And a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people are suffering and hurting, and we have to take our blessings and think, hey, we're totally blessed. We have so much. We have food to eat. We have clothing, shelter. That's not even a consideration. We just take that for granted. But a lot of people are suffering with many maldeficiencies. And
well,
so it's our job is to
we're also living
help them out, try to boost them up.
Well, thank you.
So we can all do it, Lynn.
That's a good positive.
That's all we can do.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's the word for the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Lynn.
Bye. The word for the day, uplift. Uplift each other. I like that. Some people are capable of that. There are others who clearly are not. One happens to be the President of the United States. So I was mentioning yesterday that we could be heading for, and some people who actually study such stuff say there's a likelihood we're heading for a kind of civil war. What form it will take, we don't know. It won't look like the last one, but it could involve violence, and we're already seeing little harbingers of that. People put a timeline at 10 to 15 years. I don't know, but we were talking about how there are similarities between how America and Americans were in the 1850s, especially in the last half of that decade, and now. And the similarities are a bit daunting, because you see that we are at very close to reaching a kind of implacable place where there is no hope for compromise. Some would argue we're already there, obviously. And once you're in that place, then what can happen? Only war. Once there is no other way, people cannot speak to each other. People cannot understand or comprehend or reach out or uplift each other. Then we're in a place that is exceedingly dangerous. Milton wrote in regard to that from yesterday, if there is to be a civil war, it must be remembered that both now and in the 1850s and 60s, the true catalyst to war was the challenge to the white male, to white male privilege. Women, blacks, and all other minorities have suffered, have resisted, and overcome their injustices without major military upheaval. But when the comfort and position of the white male is challenged and threatened, civil war looms on the horizon. Well, I don't know. Might be something to that. Other things I have here. Oh, and let's point out, speaking of white males and Civil War, that this is a local story, guys, that the Arts Commission of the city of Pittsburgh has unanimously recommended to the mayor's office that the statue of Stephen Foster, a renowned Pittsburgher, that sits in Schenley Plaza, should be removed and placed in a private setting in proper context. Now, that could be a museum, certainly. It doesn't have to be banished. It just shouldn't sit publicly as an indicator of who we want to be. You can wail and moan about it, but I think it's a pretty good, I myself think it's wise. As we said, imagine you're a black person walking by that statue, seeing the depiction of someone who looks like you sitting in tatters at the feet of a renowned white man who became famous for he became famous for appropriating, to use the current lingo, appropriating so much of the slaves' music. And he brought it into the mainstream. And he did so because he thought the music was wonderful. He didn't rip off their music because he thought it was unappealing. He was blown away by it and brought it to a larger audience, which is exactly what happened with rock and roll, right? Which, again, you could argue was an appropriation of African American music, same thing, by the broader white culture. That's what happens when you're in a minority group. If you're putting good food out there, interesting language, great art of any kind, of course the majority group is going to gobble it up. They're going to take it and run with it. They're not going to view it as theft. They're going to view it as actually, wow, that's really good. Let me have some of that. But by virtue of their privilege, being in a majority, they might be in a position to cash in, right, in ways that the original artists were not. I noted that in the New York Times obituary today, let me get it, actually. Why can I never find, for Fats Domino, who was largely seen as the godfather of rock and roll. There are a few godfathers of rock and roll, but he's definitely one of them. And they quote Elvis Presley, who publicly acknowledged Fats Domino as somebody who was doing what he now was famous for long before he had done it. So Elvis Presley, the white boy who was able to bring this kind of black, or as the quote will say, colored music into the mainstream of American culture, he acknowledged, in that regard, Presley's like Stephen Foster, who's being banished somewhere indoors. And here is Presley's quote. "A lot of people seem to think I started this business, rock and roll." And this is in an interview with Jet magazine, by the way, in 1957. 1957. And a young Elvis Presley is giving credit where credit is due. "A lot of people seem to think that I started this business, but rock and roll was here a long time before I came along. Nobody can sing that music like colored people. Let's face it, I can't sing it like Fats Domino can. I know that." Oh, here again, when things can get so heated about appropriation, you see Elvis Presley, a white appropriator, fully acknowledging his admiration, respect, and, in fact, his, his debt to the colored people who originated the form that he then embraced, loved, and by virtue of his white privilege and majority status as a white male in this country was able to bring it into the broader culture. See, I don't see any, I don't see a negative there. I don't see a negative of what a lot of young people, especially now, and some lefties are always calling appropriation. America is what America is because of appropriation. I was reading right before we came on, there was some tweet that said that Stephen Bannon, talking about somebody, called him a schmendrick. And I thought, that's rich. That's rich. Schmendrick is a Yiddish word. It's not complimentary. It's like there's so many of those SCHM words in that wonderful language of Yiddish, which was the language of Jews in the ghettos of Eastern Europe. There's Schmendrick, there's Schlemiel, there's Schmuck, there's Schlemazel, there's I did say Schlemiel. I'm forgetting a bunch of them. But it occurred to me, Stephen Bannon, who I think is an anti-Semite, was using a word from a Jewish vocabulary. He knew the word, he loved the word because it's a wonderful word, and he took it. And so, yeah, anti-Semites, quote, Jews, they don't write a thank you note for the word, and no Jew would expect one. Whites dance to music that clearly comes from an African/African-American culture, and that's what happens, guys. You can't criminalize something that is a natural occurrence of different people living together. That people will take on aspects of another culture because they like it. And how in this day and age we've made that into some kind of a crime. It's not. Clearly, it should be acknowledged more. But as you see, Elvis Presley acknowledged it. I think Stephen Foster probably acknowledged it. But you can't change the reality of there are dominant groups and groups that do not yield as much power. And certainly, in this country, the dominant group has been white Christians. That's the dominant group. I don't belong in that group. And a lot of other people don't belong in that group. Inasmuch as what our cultures have given to the greater culture, I think pride is what you should feel, not anger. So increasingly, I am out of sorts with the lingo of today's left and what they see as somehow crimes of a sort. Appropriation. Be careful when you use that word around me, because it's one of those words that frankly triggers me. Actually, the word trigger triggers me. So, Stephen Foster is moving indoors. Somewhere. They don't know yet. Should be put him in the museum. I'm looking at time. Hang on. So I've been reading a lot of the stuff about Senator Flake and how what he said was, yes, wonderful and all of that, and doesn't mean a damn thing, and no one is changing their mind, and it will have no effect, and it's already gone. What I say will, when history is written, be a historic speech. It's being given short shrift in real time. And it's because the Republican Party has clearly thrown in its lot with Donald Trump. He controls their party. He took it over. He took it. Lock, stock, and barrel. And so don't expect a parade of a lot of other Republicans saying bad things about the president. It ain't going to happen. New York Times has a piece today, and the headline is "Critics Give Way as the GOP Tilts to Trump's Orbit." And what you're seeing is you either acquiesce to Donald Trump, kiss his behind, or you go home. So Corker is going home. Flake is going home. Flynn's going to jail. Charlie Dent, the more moderate Republican from Pennsylvania, is going home. There's a woman who has served in the House forever from Florida, whose name is escaping me, who's quitting, going home. And what is happening here is actually frightening, because those people were considered the more honorable members of what now constitutes the Republican Party. So, and they will be replaced by either Republicans who are even more egregious, or in a few cases, maybe by a Democrat. But the Republican Party will be the Trump Party, and is now. And if that spells the end of them, which I think it will eventually, unless they're able through all kinds of means to essentially do a takeover of the country, which sort of feels like it's happening to me. And with the weakness of the Democratic Party so apparent. Here you have somebody who represents the current GOP, and this is a former Senator Tom Coburn. And he says, this is his quote, "We have a leader who has a personality disorder." Wow. I read that and I thought, you mean Coburn's going to turn? He continues, "We have a leader who has a personality disorder, but he's done what he actually told the people he was going to do, and they're not going to abandon him." Which means I'm not either. Which means Republicans will hang with him, even though they know he has a personality disorder. And if you think about it, the only Republicans that have spoken out against him are out of office or lame ducks. Name me another. That's it. So the Republicans are going to follow him. And in order to survive in this Republican Party, you pledge your fealty in every way to Donald Trump. And that's the bed the Republican Party has made for itself. Here's another advisor to a bunch of Republican incumbents. His quote, "There is zero appetite for the Never Trump movement in the party today. This party is now defined by President Trump." Wow. So they're hanging together. And damn the country. Republicans. Man, they'll do anything for power. Anything. All right. That's about it for me. I just want to say, if you're watching some of the horrors that are going on with immigration and our border patrol, they have become so aggressive, so absolutely inhumane, cruel. You maybe have seen pictures of mothers with children hanging on their legs, mothers being wrested away. I mean, hardworking people who are not criminals. They don't have the right papers. And there's a story now, I think it's out of Texas, of a 10-year-old girl who was very ill and also suffering with cerebral palsy. And she needed surgery. She needed, I think, her gallbladder removed. And in her family, in taking her to the hospital, encountered a roadblock of sorts that are set up near border areas. And the little child was grabbed. On her way to the hospital for surgery, a 10-year-old girl with cerebral palsy was considered a threat, I guess, to our national security. And she was grabbed. She was eventually, this might even startle you, allowed to go to a hospital for the surgery. But the minute she walks out, or is wheeled out, I don't know if she can walk, they're going to grab that little girl and send her somewhere into a detention camp. This is America. This is America. Makes you want to weep. Something else, heads up. Not happy. I've talked to you about this before. The FCC, now headed by a lunatic, Trumpian. This guy is now about to lift all of the limits. Some of them have been in place since the 70s. Is about to lift all of the limits on how many TV and radio stations and newspapers any one company can have. And of course, what that means is, what's going to happen is there'll be 2, 3 companies, maybe 4, that are going to own every media outlet in this country. One of them, very well positioned, is this outfit called Sinclair that I've been warning you about. Sinclair is to the right of Seb Gorka, who they employ, and all of whose stations have to, in their newscasts, have Seb Gorka, who's a Nazi, deliver his wisdom about what's happening in America. We're heading, guys, into what looks very much like a system for a totalitarian government. Concentrate media in a few hands. I'm just saying. When the first limits were lifted in the 80s, and Bill Clinton signed that, you saw what happened. That's when your AM radio stations went down. That's when all of a sudden shows you liked, local stuff, disappeared. That's when radio was destroyed and turned into a right-wing media propaganda machine. It's how it happens. It's how it happens. Ray, I'll get you in here, and then I'm saying goodbye because I've depressed myself so much I'm going to go wander around in the desert. I say that because I see your first word is hypocrisy, and your second word is exodus. That got me to thinking about the desert. This is from Exodus, Bible. You shall not molest or oppress an alien, for you were once aliens yourself in the land of Egypt. The translation I know doesn't have the word alien, it has stranger, which is more, I like better. You shall not molest or oppress the stranger, for you were once strangers yourself in the land of Egypt. That is something Jews say at Passover, at their Seders. And I've often argued that that's what made me a liberal. The Seder made me identify totally with the slave. You were once slaves yourself in the land of Egypt. You were once strangers yourself. You shall not, it goes on, wrong any widow or orphan. If ever you wrong them, and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry. My wrath will flare up, and I will kill you with the sword. Then your own wives will be widows, and your children orphans. Ray's just doing biblical verses here, just trying to explain that all of those good Christians, all those evangelicals, first of all, they don't put any, this is Old Testament to them. They don't testify about the Old Testament stuff too much. The more Old Testament, if you lend money to one of your poor neighbors among my people, you shall not act like an extortioner toward him by demanding interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, you shall return it to him before sunset. For this cloak of his is the only covering he has. What else has he to sleep in? If he cries out to me, I will hear him. Yeah. Hypocrisy. Okay, you guys, speaking of Exodus, I'm making my Exodus, and I'll be back tomorrow, I hope, in a slightly cheerier frame of mind. I really do. Okay, bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.